Hello and welcome. I am in Blender and I'm going to take a look at animating objects and the camera. To start out with animating, of course, you're going to need a timeline, and Blender's timeline is right down here at the bottom. I'm just going to click on this dark black line right there and drag up so that we can see the timeline a little bit better. The timeline is set up in frames per second. And to know the frames per second for this timeline, we're going to jump up here real quick to our output, click on that, and you'll see that our frame rate is 24 frames per second. So based on that, we have a little over 10 seconds in this timeline. The timeline indicator right here, this blue line right here, you can click on it and drag it, and whenever we play, hitting the space bar, you'll see that it'll play through the timeline. Now, right now, there's nothing animated, so we're not seeing anything going on in the viewer. If we need to change the length of the timeline, we can use our end property here. And so if I want this to be exactly 10 seconds long, I can click on this and type in 240. And this will be a 10-second long animation. To navigate through this, you can see that we have transfer controls right here, and we have a play forward and a play reverse. We also have a button here on each side that will jump us to either the previous keyframe or the upcoming keyframe. And then these other two controls here on the outside will get us to the beginning of the timeline and to the end of the timeline. Now, these four controls right here do have a shortcut key. And to jump to the front of the timeline, we can hold down the Shift key and then use the left arrow button. And then to get to the back end of the timeline, we can hold down the Shift key and use the right arrow button. And then if we want to jump between keyframes, we can use the up and down arrow keys, which I don't have any keyframes at this moment, so we can't see that. This little button right here is auto keyframing, and I'll get back to that in just a few minutes. So let's start animating. To animate, of course, we're going to need an object, and we'll just use the default cube here. And I do have the gizmo set up on this. It's just kind of the way I like to work with things. I'm just going to push the cube back a little bit here. And to set our first keyframe, I do need to get to the beginning of the timeline. So I'll just use Shift and left arrow to get back to the beginning of the timeline. And I want to set that position property right there. And to do that, as long as I'm hovering in the viewer, I will click the I key, and it's going to bring up this menu. It gives me a number of different options to choose from. Now, right now, all I want to do is set location. So I'll click on the word location, and that sets a keyframe right here with my location property. Then I'm going to move in the timeline, and I'll just move about 2 seconds in the timeline. And then I'll bring this forward. And I will set that keyframe as far as location by, again, hitting the I key and selecting location. And now we have our second keyframe. It's always going to take at least 2 keyframes to create any animation. So I'll jump back to the beginning by hitting Shift left arrow. And then to play this, the space bar. And there's our first animation. So I'll keep moving through. I'll do a few more animations like this. If I want this to stay there for a moment, let's say just a second, I can drag my timeline indicator to, what would that be, about 72 frames there. And there's 2 ways of setting a hold. One is that I can go to the second keyframe and then select Shift D and then just drag my mouse. And we drag that keyframe, that duplicated keyframe right there. And it's the same location property as this one. So it's just going to hold that location right there during that 1 second. Then I can move forward in my timeline. Let's say I'll jump up to, let's go to 96 frames. And I will move now my cube. And again, with the I key, select location. And so we have 2 animations in one hold. It'll hold right there, and then another animation. Now, I'm going to use my down arrow key so that I can jump back to the first keyframe right there. And what I want to do is I want to add in rotation because I want to make this rotate also. And to do that, I will hit the I key, go to rotation, select it, and now I'll jump to the second keyframe by using the up arrow key, and I will adjust one of the rotation properties. Now I have these transform controls out here, and they're very handy. And to get to those, if you don't see them, just hit the N key, as in no, and it will bring up these transform controls. And with that object selected, I'm going to do one full rotation on the x-axis. So I'm just going to click on that and hit 360 degrees. And you'll see the different colors that we have here. When it's yellow, it means that on location for that property, that a keyframe has been set. If it's orange, it means that we've changed the property, but we haven't set a keyframe. And then if it's green, it means that we've not changed and we've not set a previous keyframe for that. So what I want to do here is, this is another way that we can set keyframes, is I'm just going to hover over that property, and then I'm going to hit the I key. And you'll see that all of those rotation properties go yellow, which means now that I've recorded that rotation information right there on that keyframe. So I'll shift left arrow back to the beginning of the timeline, hit the space bar, and you can see now that it's moving and rotating. And so what I'll do then is I'll jump to this third keyframe, I'll arrow down, and I'll hover over my rotation properties because I want to add rotation to this, and I'll hit the I key. And so now it knows that I want to set a keyframe here for rotation, and then I will jump to my fourth keyframe right there. And then I'll change one of the rotation properties. Just go ahead and change that to 360 degrees. And I will hover over this and I'll hit the I key. And so now we've set those properties for both location and rotation. Shift left arrow back to the beginning, hit the space bar and play that. You can see that I have location and rotation properties changing on both of those animations. So now I'm going to jump in and start using this auto keyframing. And with that selected, I don't have to do quite as much work. So I do want to set a hold here. So I'll set it at 120 and I want it to stay right there. I'll still need to come into the viewer and hit the I key and select location and rotation for that keyframe right there, just so that I can set a hold. But then when I move forward in the timeline and then I move the cube, you'll see that it automatically sets that keyframe for me. It sets it on all three: location, rotation, and scale. And so it set that keyframe for me. I can also change, once I've moved there, I can change the rotation on one of these properties. So I'll change it on the Z axis, 360 degrees. And it has recorded that information also, because all of our properties here are yellow. So when I jump back, we're right in the middle of that hold, and then we'll play through that next animation. And I'll keep doing that. So right about there, well, let's see, let me set a hold. I'll just set a short hold right there. And again, I'm just going to need to, well, what I can do is hover over these objects here one at a time and hit the I key. And so it sets that hold for me. And then I'll move forward a little bit and I will move the position. You'll see that it sets a keyframe for me, and then I'll change one of the rotations, set it back to 0, and then we can jump back and play through that. And I'll set that one more time, one more quick hold. Just hover over these, hit I as I hover over, and then I'll move forward and change my location, and then also adjust one of the rotations again. And it has set that last keyframe for me. And so I'll just shift and left arrow, and we're back at the beginning of the timeline, and we'll play through that. And the timing of any of these can be adjusted by moving the keyframe. You simply come in here. I've just selected a blank area in here so that I deselected all of the keyframes. And I'm going to grab this one. If I want this to be a little bit faster animation, I can grab that one right there and speed it up. And then I have a much longer hold there, but this first animation is a lot faster. And then if I want to move all of these forward, I can click and drag around all of them, select them, and then I can move them forward so that that is a much shorter hold right there, and then continue to adjust these out. So if I want this next animation right here, it'll be a little bit longer. I can select all of them and drag those out. And so you can keep adjusting the timing of all of these animations by adjusting the keyframes there. So we've looked at 3 ways to set keyframes. The first one is to hover over the viewer and hit the I key and select what properties you want to set a keyframe for. The next way is to hover over any of these transform properties here and hit the I key, and that will set a keyframe for that object there. And then the other is to use auto keyframing. So as you move your timeline indicator and you change the property of any of these, then it will set a keyframe automatically for you. The next thing that I want to take a look at is interpolation mode. Now, as we play through the animation, you'll see that the animations are kind of easing out of their start and easing into their stop. And so that interpolation mode is called bezier. There's 3 different types of interpolation modes, so we'll take a look at those. So if we right-click on a keyframe, you'll see this option for interpolation mode. There's bezier, which it is already set to, linear, and then constant. I'll demonstrate constant next. To do that, I'm going to get rid of this second keyframe here, going to delete it, and play through the animation. And you see that we play through this and it's easing into this stop. It's easing out of this start here and then easing into this stop. And then it automatically starts into the next animation. And what I'm going to do to demonstrate constant is I'm going to go to this first keyframe here, right click on it, and go to the interpolation mode of constant. So now when we play through it, it's just going to hold this position until it reaches the next keyframe, and then it will pop to that position and then begin playing. So that is another way of just setting a hold or just making an object pop around on location, rotation, whatever property you're wanting it to just kind of switch on, switch off, that sort of animation. So now we'll go to linear. And I will again go to this first keyframe, right click on it, and go to interpolation mode and go to linear. And I'll also, just to be on the safe side, set the second one to linear also. And what we're going to see is a constant speed between those 2 positions. There's no easing in or out of that animation. And so let's go back to that real quick. It's just a constant speed from beginning to end. So those are the 3 interpolation modes. Now I want to introduce you to the graph editor. So I've gone back to my original animation. So we should have easing in and out, the Bezier interpolation mode set on all of these. And to go to the graph editor, I'm just going to open this up a little bit more. And I'm going to jump right here to this drop-down menu. And you'll see all of these different options that we have here. Right now we're on timeline, and I want to go to the graph editor. So I'm going to select that right there. And we have all of these different colored lines that are angled, curved. And so that is our graph editor. And I'll start explaining what's going on here. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and move this around just a bit so we can see this animation and jump back to the beginning of the timeline. And we'll play right there. So what I want to look for is the position property here that's moving from here to here. And so I'm going to, the cube is selected, and I'm going to jump into the properties here. And you'll see that I have an X, Y, and Z location as well as rotation and scale. Now, I don't want to see all of the lines for all of these properties, so I'm just going to hide everything except for this X location, which is the one that I know is creating this first location animation right here. And so I'm going to move this around just a little bit so that we can see more of it. And I'm going to hold down Control and then use my middle mouse button to kind of squish this a little bit so that I can see this a little bit better. Now, the first two keyframes right here, that's our first keyframe, and that's our second keyframe. And you may notice that when I click on them, they have handles. And what these handles do, they allow me to shape this curve. And so remember I said that we're on Bezier and that this eases out of its start and then eases into its stop right there. You can see those ease right there on that bend. And so if I want to adjust that more, I can go to these handles and I'll have to click that handle, and then I can grab that handle and I can start dragging it out. So it's only going to let me go so far, but what that will do now is it is going to create a very slow start on the location property right there, speed up very quickly, and then ease back into the end there. So let's play through. And so that way we can change our animations, just their speed, and then I can even adjust their position a little bit by bending it below that line right there. And so we'll go back and play. You can see it kind of bounces back and then moves forward. So this is a way that you can add a lot of life to your animation using these Bezier curves and easing these in and out. So we'll play with that just a little bit more, go back in the opposite direction. And so it's a very fast start and then slows down. And you can do that with any property that you've animated. So let's go take a look now at the rotation that we set up there. And I'll need to navigate down and then also Control and then the middle mouse button so I can squish this down a good bit so I can see it. There we go. And move it around a little bit using that middle mouse button. And then again, if I want to drag this out, and that way we have a very slow start on our rotation, and then it speeds up and eases into that stop. So there's our graph editor. So if I want to get back now to my timeline, I'll come back over here to this drop-down menu, and I'll jump back to my timeline. And let's take a look now at animating the camera. The way that I like to work in animating the camera is I want to see the scene through the camera. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I do have a camera in the scene. If you don't have a camera in the scene, you'll need to add one. So just go up to Add and drop down to Camera, and you can add that camera in. And I'm going to come over here now to this icon right here, and you can also use the keyboard shortcut, which is on the number pad if you have a number pad 0. But I'm going to click this little camera icon. And so now I am looking through the camera. This doesn't mean that I'm going to navigate through the camera, which is what I want to do, because if I start navigating around, you can see I've jumped out of that camera view. And so I'll hit the 0 on the number pad. I'm back in to the camera mode. So that I can set this up to navigate the camera, I'm going to come over here again to these transform controls. And if you don't have these, again, it's the N key on the keyboard. And I'll go to View right here, this tab right here. And then I'm going to drop down to View Lock. And I want to just pull that out so you can see it. Camera to View. I want to lock that camera to view. And so now when I navigate around, I am actually moving the camera around. So anything that I see in this area right here is the camera's view. So I'm going to move back to the beginning of the timeline, hold down Shift left arrow, and I'm going to start positioning my camera or the way that I want to see this animation. So just using the normal navigation of the middle mouse button and Shift and kind of bringing that in. I'll start about right there. And again, I need to set my keyframes for this. So I'll make sure that my camera is selected, and then I'll hover over these properties here and hit the I key. And I have set a keyframe there for my camera. I'm not sure why I have a second one right here, but I'm going to delete it because I don't need it. And then I'm going to let that animation play through. And let's see, that ends about right there. So I'll end this first camera animation about right there. So again, going to navigate, zoom out just a little bit. I think I need to slide that just a bit. And I am on auto keyframing, so it set the second keyframe for me. I'm going to jump back to the beginning and see how that animation looks. All right, I like that. Actually, I'm going to jump back to that second keyframe and work on that just a little bit more. Since the animation is going to go to the right here, I want this focused, or I want this more in the center of the camera view. So I'll begin to navigate this to about right there. And then again, I'm going to hover over, set that keyframe, and let's go back to the beginning, play that through. Yeah, definitely like that. And then let's play through that animation and we'll reframe the camera. Let's see where that kind of ends right there. Move the camera over. And then we'll play through. And now I want to come in here and set a hold since the cube is also on a hold. And again, to set a hold, there's a couple of different ways I can do that. Make sure that none of my keyframes are selected. I will go to this third one now, and I'm going to hit Shift D and start dragging that over. So that should set a hold. And then we'll see where that animation, where that cube ends up. About right there. And then I will reframe my camera and maybe zoom in a little bit on it. And then I'll jump up here real quick and just make sure that I have keyframes set on all of that. And we'll jump back a little bit and play that. And we'll hold for just a moment. Maybe right there. And again, I can set a hold. Another way to set a hold is just to move my timeline indicator. And then I'll hover over my properties and hit the I key. Sets that hold right there. And then I will see where that animation ends up. And then begin to navigate my camera to frame up the cube again. And we'll take a look at that animation. And just continue this process out. So one more hold real quick, maybe to about right there. And again, I'm going to select that keyframe, Shift D, drag that over to about right there, set it, and then and I am not sure where that ends, so let's see. I can move that keyframe once I get this in place. And let's see where that times out. Okay, the cube stopped right there, so let me undo that because I'm moving both of those keyframes. I just want to move the second one. And let's see how that plays out. All right. So now we have animated both the cube and the camera. And we've used a little bit of the graph editor to change the easing on some of these. And one last thing that might be helpful, I'm going to take a look at this little arrow right here. I'm going to pull this out. And so now you can see a summary of all the keyframes. This is not your graph editor, but if you do want to jump into the individual keyframes that you do have animated and adjust them separately, so if we had different animations for the X, Y, and Z locations and we wanted to adjust those keyframes as far as their timing goes, we can jump in here and adjust those however we want to. I hope this has been helpful.